Imagine, if you will, a large group of politicians that are all part of the same party, political party. They all work together to get each other reelected and to grow the power of the party. That's actually referred to as a political machine. It's one of your definitions. Quite often, these machines were very corrupt. In fact, most often. So what they would do is they would offer services to voters and businesses for political and financial support. Okay? So, in other words, all right, if you want this city contract to build this new courthouse or whatever, well, then you have to donate a kickback of the cost to the political machine. And we're going to take that money and pay voters $5 a piece for every time they vote in order to keep that political machine in power and to grow the system. So we are stealing from the government, which, if you know anything about that, you're stealing from the taxpayers, from the people. You're giving the money back to the people to steal, to buy their vote. Okay? By the way, are there still political machines today? Absolutely. They still exist. They're still corrupt. And a lot of their activities are behind the scenes and still illegal. Okay? Power is based on having its members always elected, because the more people in office, the more favors they can grant to the people, the more money they can skim off the top from the government, the more votes they can buy on election day to stay in office. It's a cycle. This is how this thing works, okay? It was a source of major corruption in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Their power came from a few things, okay? Number one, patronage. All right? Patronage means hiring loyal political supporters. So let's say I want to get a job in the government, okay? Well, the guy that's running for office says, if I win, and if you support me in my campaign, if you give political speeches, and you give money to me during the campaign, and you raise money for me, then I'll give you a job in the government. A nice, cushy job where you don't have to do much, okay? So that's patronage. You're hiring loyal people. Immigrants were provided food, jobs, and housing by the machine and voted for it, okay? So imagine that you're coming from Italy, okay? You don't know English. You don't know how to speak English. You get off the boat, and all of a sudden, there is a member of the political machine there in New York City, Tammany Hall, that is waiting for you. And he shakes your hand, and he says, would you like a job? And you just got off the boat. You need a job. So you'd say, sure. Now, he's speaking to you in Italian. Why is that? Well, he was from Italy. He knows Italian. Now he works for the machine. His job could one day be yours if you actually play ball, you know. So anyway, so he says, would you like a job? Would you like a place to live? Would you like a nice hot supper tonight? How about you come with me? I'll pay for supper. You and your whole family can come tonight, and we will discuss what's going to happen. So the deal is made, and basically what it says is, if you support the political machine, if you vote for us, if you work in our jobs that we're going to give you because we control them, okay, then you're going to continuously get these things as long as we stay in power. So a lot of these immigrants got caught in this political machine mess. Some more examples of this, okay? So Tammany Hall was the biggest political machine in New York City, okay? In fact, it was the most powerful one in America. Now, what they used to do is they would go around and buy all the turkeys in New York City. Okay, they would buy millions of turkeys. And they would take a cattle brand that said Tammany Hall on it, and they would brand the turkey on the breast, okay? And they would hand this out to poor immigrants. Whether they would vote for Tammany Hall or not, they would hand it out. And the reason why is because they're trying to buy votes, okay? They never asked what party you belong to. They're just trying to bribe everybody. Now, how did they get the turkeys? Well, so you remember the Italian guy that gets off the boat, right? He gets an apartment at a cheap rate because Tammany Hall owns the apartment building. He gets a job that's controlled by Tammany Hall, a government job or a factory job. But he has to kick back 5% of his salary to the boss. The boss then takes that money and gives it to Tammany Hall, and they buy turkeys with it, or they buy Christmas toys with it, and they give it out to little kids at Christmas time. And that's a very powerful tool, yo. Imagine you're dirt poor, you have nothing, you just got to America, but Christmas is important to your kids, and Tammany Hall is handing out toys for your children so they can have a good Christmas. Parents, remember that kind of thing. All right, so the corruption boiled down to a few things. One is payola, okay? Money paid to the government to not enforce the law. This is on your basic U.S. history vocabulary, okay, I think it was. So, if I pay the cop to look the other way while I commit a crime, like dealing drugs or something like that, that is payola. I'm constantly having to pay them so I don't get arrested. That's one source of money for Tammany Hall and all political machines. The other one is the kickback, okay? We already talked about that. An individual or company returns part of their pay to the machine for a job. So we have a big courthouse to build. It's going to cost, I don't know, $10 million, let's say. Okay. Well, Tammany Hall says it's going to cost $15 million. All right. So that's $5 million right off the top of profit. Well, Boss Tweed, the guy in charge of Tammany Hall, would get $4 million of it, and you would keep $1 million just to keep your mouth shut and to get the job. Okay. All right. Graft, fraud in politics. This is another definition you've already had. Overcharging. Okay. Example: politicians told friends to buy land. Okay. A government. Okay. So let's say, go back to the courthouse example. Okay. So let's say there's a rundown store in the middle of New York City. I mean, it's a real crap hole, right? Well, the governor of New York, or the mayor of New York, I should say, city, would tell his friend, hey, go buy that old rundown lot, and in next month, I'm going to announce that we're going to build a new city hall there, okay? Now, you buy it for cheap, and after they announce the government project, what happens to the value of that land? Well, it skyrockets. Okay, something that might have cost you $2,000 or $3,000 is now worth over $1 million. Well, how do you tell your friend, the mayor, that you're grateful? Well, give him $500,000 out of it. And next time he has a proposition like this, he'll come back to you and you can do the same thing. Okay, somebody did that exact thing, okay, in New York City, and he said, now that's honest graft. Okay. In other words, that's an honest way of ripping the people off, the taxpayers off. The government could have just went and bought that thing for $2,000 or $3,000, but instead now they have to pay $1 million so the mayor can get his pockets lined with money. All right. Something that might be a sore subject by this point in American history: voter fraud. Okay. So, voter fraud was very common. Okay. We had the graveyard vote, okay? So they would dig dead people up and make them vote. Not really, okay? What they would do is, as people register to vote, they're on a list at the courthouse. Whenever you turn 18, you need to register to vote at the Crowley Courthouse if you live in Acadia Parish, okay? So anyway, as people die, they actually just wouldn't take them off the list. So people would vote as dead people. All they would have to do back then, there was no such thing as a photo ID. You just show up and say, this is my name, okay? And they would let you vote. So, men voted multiple times by shaving repeatedly and using the graveyard vote, okay? The phrase was, vote early and vote often, okay? Yeah, you're only supposed to vote once, all right? So, here's what they would do. If you looked around New York City around the turn of the century, around late 1800s, early 1900s, you would see on election day that all the men had long hair and big beards, okay? And that's because Tammany Hall, the Democratic political machine in New York City, would pay these men $5 per vote at a time when people are making $1 a day. So if you could vote 20 times on election day, you could literally make $100. That is a third of your salary for the entire year. All paid for by money that was ripped off by by Tammany Hall, they ripped off the taxpayers. Okay. So the way it would work, you had your long hair, you had your beard, right? And you would get a list. Okay. The list is actually, you get one name from Tammany Hall, piece of paper with a name on it, and you'd go vote. And then they would give you a little token. It's like a sticker, okay, or a coin. Depends on which precinct you were in. And you would take that coin and you would walk right across the street to a barber shop or something like that, and you would give the coin to them, and that would tell them that you voted, all right? So they would give you $5 and they would hand you a new name. You would go to the barber shop, sit down, and they would trim a little bit off the beard and a little bit off the hair. You go back right across the street, vote again, and take your token back, get your $5, get a new name, sit down. Now they're going to cut your hair shorter. You're gonna have a short haircut, big beard. Over and over and over again. So you start the day off looking like Jesus, and you end the day off looking like Mr. Clean with a bald head and a bald face. Okay? But you made a third of the salary for a year, you know? So, dogs voted. Okay? They would register their pet's name. So, Mrs. Sprinkles is coming to vote, that kind of thing, or Spot, okay? Spot Johnston, whatever. All right. So, and those were the names that were given to the men that would repeatedly vote. Stuff the ballot box before voting. So let's say voting opens at 8 o'clock, okay? Tammany Hall, the Democratic political machine, would take a bunch of ballots, thousands of ballots, and it was nobody but Tammany Hall in the room because they ran the voting station. And they would sit there from, let's say, 12 o'clock midnight until 8 o'clock when the polls open, filling out ballots with fake names or with dogs' names or dead people's names. And they would just sit there, fill out ballots, and shove them in the box that nobody could see in. And when the doors open for election day and the first person that goes to put their ballot in, there's already 7,000 or 8,000 ballots in the box. Okay, that's called stuffing the ballot box. The most ingenious one, I think, was Louisiana. Okay. Not saying it was a good idea, but it was a pretty smart thing, okay? So the people that were, and this is during the time of Jim Crow. This is the time when Louisiana was really racist, okay? So what they would do, they would put the voting booths in the middle of a swamp on an island, okay? The only people that knew where the voting station was these white Southern Democrats that were in the Ku Klux Klan. So they would literally show up on a pirogue, okay, on a boat at a place to pick them up that was announced before, and they would literally be wearing their Klan outfit. Now, if you're a black guy going to vote in the year 1880, okay, 1870, whatever, and you see that your ride to the middle of an island, in a swamp somewhere, is 2 Klansmen, and it's just you and the 2 Klansmen on the boat. Are you getting in that boat? What would happen if you actually got in the boat? What do you think? So this was their way of suppressing the black vote. This is another way of doing it, okay? All right.